welcome to Public Forum. External Affairs Minister S.M. Krishna today met Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa in Colombo and is understood to have discussed a host of bilateral issues, including the ways to evolve a political solution to resolve the Tamil problem. Krishna had yesterday set the tone for his talks by saying that India was committed to ensuring political settlement, including devolution of powers to resolve the problem. The minister also gave the assurance to a delegation from the Tamil National Alliance, an umbrella grouping of Tamil political parties in Sri Lanka. He'll also be reviewing the developmental projects being implemented by India. 3 more agreements in the fields of agriculture, telecommunication and railways are expected to be signed. And joining me for more on this today, a very esteemed panel. With me is the Vice Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs, foreign affairs expert, and he's also written a book on Sri Lanka, Sreeram Chaulia. Thanks very much, Mr. Chaulia, for joining us here. So, External Affairs Minister is on a 4-day visit to Sri Lanka and a host of issues are being discussed. In the first segment, we are asking how important this visit is. There's no trust deficit, but there's a lot of trust, and even when India is giving money to Sri Lanka, the projects are being well monitored and well taken care of. But we also know that Mr. Krishna will be visiting many of the development projects and has also now given more money for building housing projects for internally displaced people. But if I have to ask you, Dr. Chaulia, what is also being said is that there is a perception that India's interests are being undermined at this stage also because of Sri Lanka developing good relations with China. Do you really feel that, though we also know that the idea of developing a port at Hanmantota was actually first offered to India, and India didn't really make it, and then the offer went to China. But there's also a perception in India now that Sri Lanka is going close to China and China is going closer to China to Sri Lanka.
That has piled up since the destruction of the LTTE, because it was seen as, although India had stopped supporting the LTTE, the argument was that there was some kind of pressure on Colombo, on the regime, to listen and to accede because they needed India's support at the end game of the war. Now that the war is over, conflict is not over, but the war is over, there is a perception that we are trying to apply pressure, and I see the foreign minister's visit as part of that. It's just that diplomatically we don't use the word pressure, but we're trying to continue to apply pressure on what we see is in the best interest of reconciliation. And they continue to, formally or informally use the China card. Like Rajiva Vijayasena is in the country right now, and he's been saying, for example, that we must not press too hard on human rights and these kind of issues, because then it would be playing into the hands of the whole, Western agenda of pitting India against China. I think that's a false notion, and they've played that card often. And we have I would say that we have probably fallen for that bait in the past. And I hope that we are more strident and forthright.
But do you really feel that India has done its bit, as far as building that pressure is concerned on the Rajapaksa government? Because the time taken so far to actually do something really genuinely for the Tamilians, displaced Tamilians in Sri Lanka, we haven't really seen much performance on that front.
It's a question of leverage, and right now, if you think about it. Yeah, developmental projects, housing schemes, some aid and so on. But, at the end of the day, it's about leverage. And if you think about it in a political way, China can always outspend us in these development projects, right? They've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Hanmantota. So, and in terms of checkbook diplomacy, I've always maintained we will always be second to China. So we'll have to think about other means of having leverage. The TNA meeting, the TNA, I think is a good sign. TNA has had a dubious past. It used to be a stooge of the LTTE. I've seen it with my own eyes during my peacekeeping days. But it is also won democratic elections.
In fact, Mr. Krishna refrained from meeting TNA last time when he visited Sri Lanka. In fact, this is the first time.
I think it's a way of sending a signal that we still have players there who will respond to Indian interests and concerns, and we will need these levers in order to apply pressure. I mean, apart from the smooth talking, the basic point is we have been asking to devolve and devolve and devolve, and the Rajapaksas have been concentrating more and more power, centralizing more and more power.
True.
So is this a futile exercise? I hope not, but the idea is that, through these visits, we add on the pressure.
Right. So at least engagement is one way where you can add, through which you can actually maintain the pressure. But at this stage, TNA has also requested the foreign minister to directly intervene in this issue and do something about it. So can India really afford to take that action against Sri Lanka and build in some sort of a political pressure? We need to ask that question as well. It's now time for us to take a short break. Next, when we come back, we'll discuss more on this. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You are watching Public Forum and we are discussing Sri Lankan politics. So the two leaders discussed a host of bilateral issues, including an expansion of economic ties and increased cooperation in areas of development. Now we'll try and understand the changing dynamics of India-Sri Lanka relation. But the question here is that at this stage, Sri Lanka, and to what extent we can build pressure on Sri Lanka, because for us the big issue here is resettlement of Tamils, and also all that was committed to us by the Rajapaksa government when Rajapaksa came through with a landslide victory, and especially what is also being said about TNA, because TNA will also be holding meetings on the same 2-3 days when Mr. Krishna is also there. So can we really expect that there will be some positive outcome?
TNA has had a, I would say, a very checkered past, and the fact that it remains the only elected legitimate non-military representative for Tamil people left means that, as Ambassador said, that is the option. That is the only option to go to. But it would be good to think about, the problem with TNA is that they are also eyeing a lot of power and wealth when they talk about devolving on their terms rather than on Colombo's terms. So I've spent so much time on the ground and I've seen it from the bottom up. TNA hardly solved Tamil people's problems in the north and east during the war, and TNA was very, very clearly manipulated by LTT at the time. And members of parliament are supposed to address basic governance issues, and that they have failed quite miserably. Of course, they always blame the fact that we don't have enough power. Give it to us once, and then we will transform people's lives and raise levels of standards of living. But if we talk about
the politics of Sri Lanka, which is largely Sinhala dominated, do you really feel that the government has taken an effort to make it more inclusive?
No, I think Sinhalese chauvinism has always informed the Rajapakshas, and it is quite obvious that a kind of Buddhist fundamentalism has been behind their backs throughout the prosecution of the war and even after. There is a majoritarian tendency in the government, and in my book I've compared Sri Lanka to Israel, and since I've talked about ethnocracies where ruling majorities tend to be very, very illiberal. I'll give you an interesting anecdote. When Manmohan Singh was appointed Prime Minister first time, 2004, right? I was there, and everybody in the north and east was coming and congratulating me, saying this can happen only in India. A Sikh gentleman who belongs to a small minority could become the Prime Minister of the country. They said we cannot foresee a Muslim or Tamil ever reaching that executive authority. So you have the so-called executive presidency right now, which is based on intolerance and on...
And maybe that was the reason, especially during voting in Jaffna, we saw that not many people actually went to votes. Just completely saying it again that to some extent ethnic polarization is very much...
this is the fundamental solution, more than the institutional tampering about federalism, is creating an equal society where there is no discrimination. I don't see that happening under the Rajapaksa.
So you cannot ignore the fundamental question of rehabilitating and also of reconciliation, and you have to work on that. So it's also time to go beyond assurances and reassurances, Mr. Chaulia.
I think India must emphasize that it's a question of justice. When you talk about so-called post-conflict, I think it's post-war, not post-conflict. At least in post-war societies across the world, you need justice in some form or the other. And that has clearly not been delivered, and India has a right to speak about justice, because what and all, we have resolved many secessionist conflicts in our own society through the mechanisms of justice and through co-optation of elites and many other tactics. So that has to be primary, and we need to emphasize this is not a Western agenda. because one of the problems with the Sinhalese spokespersons and their propagandists is they keep saying that India, should not behave like the West. There's some kind of in my book.
Time and again, India has also, said that we don't believe in intervening or interfering in other countries' domestic politics, and that's one reason that India is trying to refrain itself.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you want a neighborhood, if you want a South Asia, of which we are the hub and we are the driving engines, we will have to create a values-based regional community, and there you cannot take values out of foreign policy.
Okay.
Why are we advocating for justice? Because we are India. And China cannot speak about justice in Sri Lanka because it's authoritarian.
That's all we have for you in this edition of Public Forum. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.